Hey everyone, welcome back to Orange Grove 55. In this video, we're going to talk about the Stories Matter group and whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing in the Walt Disney Company. But we're going to discuss it all up next.
Welcome to Orange Grove 55.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Orange Grove 55. I will be the MC this evening, the master of ceremonies, if you will. Unfortunately, OG Orange Grove, as you know him, is unfortunately feeling a little bit under the weather, and he asked me to kind of take over today, but we wish him well and hope he feels much better soon. But I got a fantastic panel with me today, and we're just gonna dive into some juicy Disney topics involving the Stories Matter group. But I'm gonna start with the person to my right, Mr. Jay Sherer. How are you today, sir?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on. This is going to be a good topic.
Absolutely. And will you let everyone know where they can find you on social media, sir?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you've got my handle right here, Jay Sherer. Or if you go search for the Story Geeks on YouTube or any podcast provider, you can find my YouTube channel or podcast.
Awesome. Sounds good. And then down below to my bottom right, we have Miss Alia. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for welcoming me. And I am Alia Aloha, Twitter handle below. I can't remember if I mirrored my image or not, so I'm afraid to point to the corner. Yeah. I point the wrong way, but I'll just say you can see it. And I'm on Twitter, tweet with Alia Aloha.
Awesome. And of course, an Orange Grove 55 recording wouldn't be the same without Vash Sky, producer Dre, host of Freshly Squeezed, Dr. Dre, all those aliases all grouped, bundled into one big giant red bow. How are you today, sir?
Doing pretty good. And I do appreciate the titles and aliases that people have given me. I wear them with pride and with honor. So I'm super excited to get started with this topic because I think it's a very interesting one and a very important one as well. But if you guys want to interact with me at home, you can go ahead and do so right down there at Vashkai, just like it's spelled. Type in Twitter, should pop up. And if you want to see me, well, it's going to be on the channel you're watching right now at Orange Grove 55 at Freshly Squeezed, your source for juice and news and info, squeezed fresh, right from the Grove.
Pay attention, it's Joe time.
There you go.
Awesome. And of course, I'm George, the Disney Family Man. You can find me on my YouTube channel, Disney Family Man 23. You can interact with me on Twitter at Disney George. And of course, you'll find me here on Orange Grove 55's channel with Citrus Corner with a lot of juicy, sweet, but sometimes sticky Disney news and info. So, as I had mentioned with the intro, we're going to talk all about the Stories Matter group. And this is a collection of people that kind of are getting together and they're kind of deciphering of what kind of goes into something of a project of the Walt Disney Company and what doesn't. And we're going to talk about it of is that a positive thing? Is that a negative thing? And Mr. Vashkai and I had a nice lengthy conversation earlier over the phone about this, just of a different array of things that is put into this. But before I get to him, I'm actually going to start with you, Jay. What is your take on everything as far as what entails with the group itself?
Well, here's what's interesting about the group in general. Is that obviously as a person who tells stories, as a story geek, you might say, I really care about what stories, how stories inform society. And if you actually do a little bit of research, there's some really good books written on this. Stories are the way that the brain understands and interprets the world. So if you are in charge of telling stories, there is a certain amount of intensity you need to take when it comes to what are these stories suggesting is true about the way that the world operates. And Disney has a long history of telling stories. So it doesn't surprise me that there's a group that exists to do this. I think what's different about this group is that any group has to start asking itself, what are our ideologies? What are we about? What do we care about in relationship to stories? And what is it we're actually being what is it we're analyzing and what is it we need to change? And that's where I think most people have the problems. It's not that a Stories Matter group exists. It's what exactly is their intent? How are they going about doing it? And how will that impact some of the things that I really enjoy or like? And some of that's going to be opinion. Some of it's going to be ideology. Some of it's going to come from a lot of different kinds of directions. And so I think I'm glad Disney is thinking seriously about their stories. I think that Walt set a precedent for thinking seriously about stories. But when it comes to perspectives, especially if those lean towards political perspectives, that's when people are going to start saying, wait a second, what exactly are we doing, right? What exactly are we removing and why? So I'm sort of interested in the group, but I don't know if I can give a full yes, I'm in favor, or no, I'm not in favor, because I haven't really seen the full extent of what they're attempting to do quite yet. And it looks like there's some, based on some of the research that you guys have sent me, based on some of the things that I've been looking at, it seems like there's some tension inside Disney about what they want to portray to the world and what they think will be best for their bottom line. So we'll see. We'll get into it. But so I'm cautiously optimistic that there's a group of people doing that. But I think that there could be some red flags along the way.
Okay, that's actually a very good synopsis of the whole entire thing. Like, I think that is the main key factor. Is it's not just making a group and it's like, okay, well, let's just banish them off to the hidden realm of darkness, so to speak, just because it's more so of like what they're all about and what is their intent and what's going to become of the final product, after all this is said and done. Alia, where are you at all this? Do you agree with Jay? What is your notions on all this?
I agree with Jay. All I feel I can add is that representation is important. At the same time, though, Disney is a company. Companies intrinsically are not moral. They're about capitalism. They need to have a return on investment, make money. So it's that sweet spot of you could say neutrality, being moderate, maybe a little bit of an overlap to moderate conservative or moderate liberal. Anything beyond that, it would either have to be the budget is recalibrated, can't be really focused as a 4-quadrant kind of thing, or it's just something that's not done. So it's all of that in a balance. And I think what's causing the tension is when there's the aspect of wanting something represented that's uncomfortable for the moderates, moderate conservatives, moderate liberals, and they want also, though, to a budget that's at 4-quadrant level. And that's, I think, where that tension exists within Disney.
I think it even gets a little bit more nuanced than that. I think it's also Disney specializes in family entertainment. So it's also not just people's individual persuasions, but also what they might want their children to actually see, what they might want their children to actually experience from them. So it's I think there is it goes maybe a step beyond in Disney's particular case, and I think the entire industry is grappling it, but for Disney in particular, that is of note and importance, and why the reaction to some of these things has been as visceral as it has been with Disney specifically, as opposed to other companies in the field attempting to balance that same equation. But go ahead, Ollie. I do apologize.
Oh, I just wanted to say, but they just announced, yes, family, but they just announced, so they are pushing the edge of Logan, Deadpool 1, Deadpool 2, going on Disney Plus starting tomorrow. So, but with the parental controls, et cetera, and all that. So I think that's also the issue too, that if they have anything that pushes that boundaries to have the parental controls, or if it's something that is aimed for youth, to either have, all in the writing, this is going to show scenes like this, or yes, just be okay with it that parents will want to watch it first. But they are pushing that just being about the family, though, by the recent announcement.
Well, no, true, and I think that's why they did put those parental controls in place in order for Disney. Or in order for families who actually have Disney Plus to be able to moderate their children's experiences with the platform in a way that's sight unseen. because I believe Disney understands that there is kind of a trust there. And I think what is worrisome about some of these initiatives is that maybe they've caused an erosion of that trust in some aspects. And this really was brought to light in a pretty profound way with what happened in Florida over there in March and so forth, right? We started seeing videos of the Reimagine Tomorrow crew and what they were actually saying behind the scenes. And I think to a lot of parents and to a lot of people who actually saw those, it was quite shocking for them. But from what I understand, this kind of mindset, this charge towards this certain direction has been at the company for quite some time, and that really is kind of the genesis of the Stories Matter initiative. It is to evaluate all stories that are being included in the theme parks going forward, and to reevaluate items that are already in the theme park. And it's, on some levels, I think some of that stuff is probably warranted, right? You probably should have a keen ear, out there for what you're producing, and for maybe the sentiments that people might be experiencing that through, and obviously be maybe sensitive towards those issues, without question. But some of it goes well beyond that. From what I understand, well, actually, you know what, George, could you go ahead and do me a favor? Mm-hmm. Go ahead and share my screen right here, and I will go ahead and play this little snippet from Valiant Renegade's show. He had Walt Disney World Pro on. Valiant Renegade, they were tackling this topic specifically, and I just want to go ahead and play this for the audience, what the Story Matters group is all about here, and what they might entail for the future of Disney parks. So I'll go ahead and play that real fast, and we'll discuss it.
That said list identifies...
Let me go back a little bit here.
There is a list, and that said list identifies with different categories all the things that are inside the Disney parks which are no longer considered appropriate. Now, some of those are arguably inappropriate, truly. So, for example, when you are riding the Peter Pan attraction, okay, there's a part of that attraction where you go over a depicted Native American scene, and the way that the Native Americans are depicted might be offensive. So, that may be a legitimate concern, and that may be on the list, and that may be removed at some point in the future. But it goes farther than that. So let's think about this. Let's imagine that on that list, there exists a problem, which is that when you're walking down Main Street USA, you look up and you see the windows. Main Street USA was designed so that when you look at the windows, you're seeing either the opening credits for the theme park if you're entering the theme park, or you're seeing the ending credits as you leave. So it's a really fantastic idea. And so the people who are important, who've had an important impact on the parks, their names are up there on those windows. There's only one problem with that. What if the people who are on those windows are not an equitable distribution of people groups? Then you need to change the windows. You need to get people up on those windows, but it can't be based on merit necessarily, because you don't have an equitable distribution based on merit. Well, you can see how these changes at Disney can get very specific and very unnecessary very quickly.
There you go. Looking out for certain groups and how they're represented in the theme parks, I think, is important. It's just like Jay said, kind of alluded to at the end of his statement there, that I'm cautiously optimistic about their intentions. Although I don't know if that's all they're looking out for. If it's more about maybe a certain statement that they'd like to be made over maybe other fundamental aspects like story and theme.
Well, and my question, or more so concern, is where does the line draw, as far as, because you could basically take anything of any subject matter and say, well, this is sensitive to these these group of people, this is sensitive to me, this is sensitive to you. And it's like, but where does that bar get drawn at? Because if you kind of dissect every little thing, then you end up with nothing. And this is a very bad example of this, because we're talking about Disney, we're talking about family friendly, but there was an episode of South Park, of all things, the Christmas special with Mr. Hanky the Christmas Pooh, where they literally dissected everything of what was, and this was back in the 90s, and it's where they dissected everything that could have offended this person. It's like, oh, did someone get offended by mistletoe? Oh, out goes the mistletoe. Someone get offended by the Christmas lights? Out goes the Christmas lights. So when the children went to the auditorium for their Christmas pageant, it was this weird, odd, bizarre show. It had nothing to do with any kind of holiday tradition. It was just, and everyone just got in an uproar and started fighting, because it was like, well, you all made it this way. And I know that's like a very bad anecdote of what we're talking about here, but in a sense, it kind of ties in, because if you break down every little thing, whether it's from past history of what was part of the Walt Disney Company's history or what have you, remove this, remove that, it's like, then what are you left with? And how much of a attention span can we hold upon the audience, that if it's like, okay, well, this is eventually going to be sensitive to someone, so why put it in there? It's like, where does that line get drawn? That's more so not even my question, but that's my concern. And those are questions that I would love to actually ask the Stories Matter group, is like, where are your boundaries at? So that's where I would be.
There's an interesting, because Disney, by the way, this is not new to Disney. You can just travel back in time and you can see how Disney has updated things over the course of the years when something doesn't really match with what is culturally seen as appropriate, right? So I'm thinking back, for example, to, there was a time when you could even see on the Tom Sawyer boats, right, where they had the area that was dedicated to the engine of the boat had a racial term on it, which was insensitive to Native American people. And you could even see like how they tried to cover it up, but hadn't fully painted over it yet. You kind of see like, oh, it used to say something that was probably. So Disney has a history of moving and shifting with how culture is moving and shifting. And I think that history has predominantly been good. I'll give one example, because I think that like my first response when Pirates of the Caribbean, which is a classic ride, it's an amazing ride. I don't know anybody who doesn't like the ride. Like I would like to find somebody who raises their hand and be like, I actually hate Pirates of the Caribbean. That's the person I want to meet. Probably not be friends with, but I'd like to meet him. But they updated the ride a few years back to change the selling scene, right, where they're selling different people, right? And one of the things that they did was they took out red, because it was like, we wants the redhead, and they want to buy the redhead, and it's kind of this awkward message. And this change made a lot of people kind of like up in arms, like, this is a classic ride, we love this ride, why are you changing it? And I did a whole video on this actually at the time, and I said, you know what, I actually, despite the fact that I really like classic Disney and I don't like when they change things, if you really dissect the story of Pirates of the Caribbean, we all get on a boat, we're looking for an adventure, and suddenly all of these scenes start being revealed to us. And you'll note that a lot of those scenes contain fairly objectionable behavior, right? Like, there's a war going on. They're taking the government official and they're fully dousing him in the well. We turn the corner, they're stealing things. They used to be chasing women, now they're chasing food. But at the end of that story, it shows, look what happens when you have chaos. Everything's on fire. Everybody's drunk. This is not a fun thing, kids. Now, here's what's awkward about it. They sold a lot of merch off that, right? So it's like, who wants to become a little pirate, right? After you've just seen how devastating that is. However, they made the ride change in tone when they added Johnny Depp. Because when they added Johnny Depp, now we have a pirate to root for. Now at the end of this ride, we have a pirate that's sitting there looking like he's had a pretty good time in a rocking chair. So if you track back in that scene and you go, are they suggesting to me that it's okay that they're selling human beings? And that's where it gets awkward, because before it was like pirates, but don't be a pirate, because pirates end up being drunk and they end up being in the town looks awful. But now when you change it and you say, actually, Johnny Depp's a pirate and he's our hero, now it changes the entire philosophy of what you take away as a writer, right? As a person who's enjoyed the ride. And so reflecting back on that, I thought, yeah, I understand. Now that you've said that some pirates are heroes, you do have to distinguish between what's maybe like hijinks and what's, we do not want to promote that, right? And I think that that's what they did in that case. And so after analyzing that, I thought to myself, you know what, I'm okay that they made that change, despite the fact that I don't like the changes as much, if I'm being honest, because I like going back to like what feels like 1960s Disneyland. That'd be like my chosen Disneyland. So I think that that's an idea of saying like, okay, that change, maybe I can understand where they got there, but that change is made predominantly because of the Johnny Depp edition, not because the ride didn't come to a conclusion, which was you shouldn't be a pirate. Again, the merch thing is a whole other issue that you have to get into, that they have to think about as well. But I think that so long as we have minds that are thinking through things at that level, I'm okay with it. If we have like the example that the guy gave in the video, where it's like, well, now we got to change some of the Main Street things because we just have to. That's not actually related to the story of Disneyland. That doesn't have. It's not telling me anything about what the story of Disneyland is, besides these are the people on whose backs Disneyland was built, and we want to show appreciation to them. So that's where it gets dicey. Like if that were an example of the things that they were going to change. Now, should they highlight somebody who is a person of color? Should they highlight a woman who is really influential in the creation of Disneyland? Yes, they should add those people. Of course, I want to see that. I want to see the history shown back to us. But if you're just doing it just so that you can check off a box and go, yeah, we accomplished what we set out to accomplish today, that's where it starts to get uncomfortable, because it starts to feel like you're just doing things so that you can appease yourself, not necessarily fans of Disneyland who have been fans for a really long period of time.
All right. Yeah. Well, and I'm actually kind of glad you brought up Pirates of the Caribbean, because that is a very good example of like everything that's going on. And my take on it is that if you go back and you listen to the Yo-Ho, A Pirate's Life for Me, if you actually read the lyrics to that song, and Disney, please don't you dare change it. I will not have it. That if you read those lyrics, I mean, it basically depicts of really what a pirate is. They pillage, they plunder, they don't give a hoot, and it's like, drink up, that's what so that's like the traditionalized of a depiction of what a pirate is, and that's how they incorporated that in the classic attraction. And then, Jay, as you had mentioned, when they brought Johnny Depp into the picture, well, it's like, as you said, he comes across as that quote unquote type of hero. Mm-hmm. And then when you watch the films of what I got out of it in the films, it's almost like he is more so just out for himself. He kind of has like this back and forth, like he almost is like the Beast from Beauty and the Beast. What they said, he's the antagonist and the protagonist. So it's like he's his worst enemy in the films, and he puts himself in a predicament where, it's not good. So it's almost like, and that to me is the way of a pirate. It's where it's like they look out for themselves. It's about the greed, it's about the treasure. But at the same time, if they want to help somebody, in the case of Captain Jack Sparrow, he has that likable, charismatic attitude towards, like, if it would benefit him in the long run, yeah, I'll help you out right now, sort of thing. So for me, by adding Johnny Depp into the Pirates ride, it doesn't necessarily make it seem like he's, for me anyways, like just the quote unquote hero. It's more so just taking a piece of him from the films and incorporating him within that pirate world. Because at the end, it's like I reign supreme. You know, they were all trying to catch me. I got the map, I got the key, I got the loot. Right. So it's like, and then as the guests go up the boat to the exit, you know, that's what you're left with is like, I fooled them all, so to speak, as you know, what Johnny would say, Captain Jack Sparrow. And so that's what I get out of it. But that's a very good synopsis of using pirates for this particular issue that we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you don't want to shield people from the truth, right? And Walt Disney did what? He built his stories off of classic folklore, right? Like most of the Disney stories are built off of classic folklore, and classic folklore always attempted to tell a story that was a warning, tell a story that was maybe a love story, tell a story that was a cautionary tale. And Disney did kind of familyize a lot of those folk tales in the beginning anyways, right? But I think about it in terms of like, let's just say take Mr. Toads, right? The message of Mr. Toads is don't get too crazy. Don't go drink a bunch of alcohol and drive, because if you do, you will end up in hell. I mean, that's the message of if you just ride the ride and say like, what were they trying to tell me? And I think that if we all of a sudden said like, well, we can't have Mr. Toad go to hell, we better change the whole ride. I mean, I would be one of the people that would be like, no, you don't. I would be up in arms about that, right? I would be say that's a harsh message. That's a very harsh message, but it is not necessarily a message that would lead people astray. Because does anyone think it's okay to drink and drive? It's really not okay to drink and drive, right? So I think that there are messages that are embedded in Disney stories that have meaning and purpose to us. Again, if stories are meant to help us understand and interpret the world, we do need to be careful about what kind of story we're telling. And so if Mr. Toad gets to do whatever he wants to, and then everything kind of just works out in the end, as long as there's some heroic behavior he participates in, maybe we could change it. But if not, then the way that it is the way that it is. So I think with Johnny Depp's character, there's this really interesting thing about Johnny Depp's character, and George, you were doing a really good job of unearthing that. And he's kind of what I would call your classic anti-hero. He's like, I want to be out for self. You can always tell if someone's a hero or a villain based on are they out for themselves or their particular tribe at the expense of others, meaning that they're selfish or tribal, or are they selfless and they're just trying to do things for other people, even if it harms them. And Johnny Depp, even though he's out for himself, always chooses in the end to be selfless and help the people around him. And so that anti-hero kind of works with him. And I think that story kind of smooths out once you change some of those things. But you could revert back to the original version of Pirates, and it tells a story. You can't be a pirate. It's all fun and games until it's not, because what you're left with at the end is flames, burning cities, and that's no fun. So I think that there's a lot you can play with, and as you change things and tweak things, it does send a different message.
And I just have to add, I'm going to channel OG here, because if he was here, I know exactly something that he would say, because he's said it many times before. And as to your quote, Jay, of you were discussing like Mr. Toad and how it ends on with him being in hell and everything. And something that OG has always said and always would stick with me is even Walt said that he was one that never wanted to dummy down a conversation to kids. Yes. He always wanted to, just like with the film Bambi, you know, a horrific scene that I think traumatized pretty much anybody that has ever watched it, but it didn't change to the fact of, oh, should we not add this? Should we add this because of the sensitivity of the children? It was like, he said the kids can handle it. And even if there are people who are very, like, don't even get me on the Fox and the Hound. See, I will cry more with the Fox and the Hound than I will with Bambi. But it's to the sense of that each person would know what their boundaries are of what they can handle. And I think even if you have children, because I am a family man, I do have a son, it's a good conversation piece to have with your children to say, you know, what is appropriate, what is not. Can you handle this? Can you not? This is this. This is that. This is make-believe. This is, you know, so I think it kind of sells the children short when you just kind of just write it off and say, oh, the kids can't handle it. I think honestly, a lot of kids can handle a lot more than what adults can at times, and that's just like for me. It's like I was a huge fan of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, and wow, did I just date myself? But it's like I always, not that I rooted for the bad guy, but I found the villains interesting. I loved their backstory. I loved the look of them. But that doesn't mean that I'm a bad guy. It's just I just found the villains more interesting than the heroes. So that's my perception on it, is like almost give, when speaking for children, kind of let them breathe, let them be able to find what they like in their common interest, than to just say, no, you can't see this, you can't do this. As we were discussing before the recording with Deadpool, coming to Disney Plus, I mean, if there's the top 3 family movies that you could watch with your kids, it's Cinderella's, The Three Caballeros, and Deadpool, so it's like, it's like one of those things. I mean, it's definitely a movie that, you would want to make sure, before letting your underage kids watch. But I mean, if that's your prerogative, then your children best. So and as I said, I don't know if OG would have said all of that, but I was trying to channel him as far as like with, don't underestimate children and what they are capable of absorbing.
I feel like we need to give OG a little love with his arm pump. Yeah, OG.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah, it's a great call out right there. I mean, look, I'll say this. I'll disagree with you a little bit there, Jay. Even with Jack Sparrow's inclusion in the Pirates of the Caribbean attraction, I don't know. I think that doesn't give the audience enough credit in representing the slave scene, or I should say, women selling scene. I don't think any of that is. I don't think the intent behind that changes even with Johnny Depp there, because we are not necessarily advocating for the positions of every single pirate. We're rooting for just one,
right, and
his actions, and he's kind of on the run, so to speak, from them. So he's not in league with them, and I think that was made pretty clear. Now, look, there's the a lot of people point to that scene as like, okay. That's a change. It's probably for the better. And look, I mean, even at the time, Mark Davis kind of, dropped back and looked and said, "Is this a little bit too much? Is this a little bit too far here?" And that was Mark, which I mean, he didn't pull any punches almost at all. But he's just looking at it, going, "Oh man, this is quite something here." But Walt, that was the only scene that Walt actually that Walt actually got to see. Before he passed away, and he gave it his kind of seal of approval. And now maybe people kind of see that and go, well, I mean, Walt's Walt, right? But interestingly, he says something that was very interesting. This was back in 1947 when he testified in front of the House of Un-American Activities Committee during the kind of Red Scare kind of phase that Hollywood and certain industries were actually going through. And he said this because the investigator asked, "Hey, have you produced material containing propaganda?" And he said this about that. He said, "No, we never have. During the war, we thought it was a different thing. It was the first time we ever allowed anything like that to go into the films. We watch so that nothing gets into the films that would be harmful in any way to any group or any country. We have large audiences of children and different groups, and we try to keep them as free from anything that would offend anybody as possible. We work hard to see that nothing of that sort creeps in." Even back then, even in the 1940s, Walt was very much considering that. And then, 20 years later, in 1967, when Pirates of the Caribbean makes its debut, it does debut with that scene. And I do agree with you, Jay. I think the original message there is quite clear. If you go down this path, you'll end tragically. And I think that message still is included with the caverns before the actual pirates themselves. As you'll remember, the people that actually, participated in that piracy all ended up dead. And unceremoniously so as well.
Right.
And I believe that conduct that follows in that attraction, while it does show what they did, they all end up in the same place. And so I think it was it was unnecessary to do that. Now, I will say there is a scene later on where if you listen to the audio of this pirate, folks, look this up. Maybe I can. We might get copyright struck though. Look, folks, look this up. Look up the original audio for Pirates of the Caribbean, not the one as it exists today, but you're going to have to go back to the 1967 time period. There's somebody called the Poop Pirate, and now that pirate, he kind of lays back and he's like, "Oh, I got the map, I got the treasure," all this kind of stuff. And Johnny does or Jack Sparrow's kind of over his shoulder, right? And he's kind of looking in, and that's the map and the key that he gets to unlock that scene at the very end of the attraction. Well, before he says some stuff that's pretty whoa, like that is way far right there. It's pretty man, I wish I had the audio on hand. Maybe I'll look it up for the show. But it is pretty insane what that guy has to say there. In that instance, it's like, okay, now you're depicting like outright pillaging, ravaging, and so forth that's featured in the song. Okay, now I can kind of understand changing that, right? But it gets to this kind of line here where it's like, are you changing the art as it was intended? Are you changing the messages as it was intended? As Jay has very astutely gone over, message and art and how these things were originally intended, they mean something quite heavily. And I kind of worry as we go along here, as we change these things for modern sensibilities, how much of that original art we lose.
Because you wouldn't want everything to be cookie cutter, squeaky clean type of thing, because then the depiction is actually inaccurate. Because in all actuality, if you're speaking of Pirates of the Caribbean, that's not how actual pirates are depicted. Now, as I said, you can kind of draw the line as to what you can use and what you cannot. As Vash had mentioned, the poopy pirate, yeah, that'd be something that you would want to change, but I wouldn't necessarily change everything, because then if you make the depiction of whether pirates are all good, then again, as Jay had mentioned way earlier, then it's like saying, well, then everyone go be an actual pirate because this is the way it is. So you kind of want to show that, I don't want to use the term bad, but you kind of want to show that other end of the spectrum. Yeah. So that way everyone can say, oh, okay, well, this is how it really is in the pirate world. So that's where it's like you have to like pick and choose your battles of really that you're thinking that you're trying to help a cause, but you could be creating an even bigger situation.
Well, an area where we may be able to come to some like agreement on it too would be, well, what if they did have a human trafficking scene, which is basically what that scene is, right? But Johnny Depp actually like intervenes somehow, right? And then it would be like you're backing up your what you're trying to say is not all pirates were really that bad. Some were just into hijinks. And then some, though, were really terrible, and they were doing human trafficking. Like, if you could kind of get that message across, but of course, we're dealing with animatronics that can't swing in and rescue people, at least at the time they did that. So it's interesting. Now, what do you guys think about, and George, I don't mean to take the show off in the wrong direction, but what do you think about the Stories Matter initiative as it pertains to Splash Mountain? Because that's a really big controversy.
That's very interesting, because again, Vash and I were talking about it earlier, like very in depth. Like we were like going through everything, and so for me, it comes down to the fact of which this was part of the conversation, that this is an attraction right now that we have absolutely no idea what is going on with it. We've gotten one piece of concept art. We've gotten a few online media videos of a roundtable discussion of everybody who is involved with this attraction, but they don't really necessarily talk about what is the attraction going to be about. We know that it's going to set after the movie Princess and the Frog. Supposedly, the issue is Lewis is he a crocodile or alligator? He's
alligator.
Mm-hmm. That he ends up losing his trumpet, and that's where the story progresses, where you have to travel along with Lewis and Tiana to try to find his missing trumpet for the Mardi Gras parade that's supposedly at the end of the attraction. So other than that, if that's even going to come to fruition, that's all we really know about. But to your point, Jay, is for to your question about it, for me, I mean, I could be taking heat for this, but this is just how I feel. In my personal opinion, and I don't know if it is true or if it's not, but in the time frame that it took for them to come up with the conception of what Splash Mountain was going to become, it's to a point of time where they felt like they needed to change something. So it almost feels like they don't really, I don't think that they had an initial plan at first of what they really wanted to do. And I think that's where a lot of the delay is coming from, because they're trying to scramble to try to figure out, okay, what is going to work? Because even though you're putting Tiana in as the spotlight, so to speak, of how they're going about things, any false move that could offend someone because you're using a character who is known as the princess. And I think that's even why they decided to change after the movie, because majority of the movie, she was a frog. They now want to depict her as the human form, as Princess Tiana. So it's like they're trying to find things where it's going to work. But again, at the end of the day, someone is not going to be happy with, you're never going to find every single person agreeing upon everything and they're going to like it. So that's where I think, honestly, that they're really trying too hard, as it's like, go with the flow, do your best, and obviously don't put anything out there that's obscene or obscure. Disney already knows that. They even have it in, if you're wearing certain outfits, that have certain sayings, they ask you to go buy a shirt or kindly leave. It's that same aspect. But when you're talking about storytelling, it's almost like they're cutting themselves off short, because they're so afraid to really tell a good story, because something may be in that story that's going to offend somebody. And you kind of already see it with the films today, in the animated films. Right now, I can't even really depict between a Pixar film and a Disney animated anymore. And I can definitely say that because I've seen Lightyear. and it's, again, it shows in the movie, because as much as I love Pixar, I love everything, but Lightyear.
I actually have seen that film recently as well, so that's a very interesting thing you say that. Now, Alia, as far as Tiana's Bayou Adventure replacing Splash Mountain, what do you have to say on this? Because I have quite a bit, and I don't want to I don't want to go on for a long period of time without input from what you have to say.
Come on, Alia, jump in there.
Well, I was going to go back to that footage that was shown, and hopefully that last part was hyperbolic with the Main Street window names, and hopefully he was just guessing, because if that's true, no, that's a no-go. Cannot change those. Cannot change those names. And if people are added, they have to have earned it, not just because, you'll do. To me, that's just insulting to that person and the diversity group. Okay, yeah, that's a no-go. With Tiana, the Bayou Adventure, they're supposed to have more information at, let's say it together, D23.
Expo. That's it.
I almost feel like I can't really give an opinion until that happens, at least. But you can tell by how things were announced. It's usually when they announce something, it's okay, here's all of our concept art information, here's some idea. But you could tell with that first reveal, what was it, a couple of years ago? It was, we're going to do this. Let's get something together. Let's announce it. And that's usually the blue sky part. They never reveal that. They revealed, you could tell a little bit of their blue sky kind of, let's write things on the board and figure it out and brainstorm about our next attraction. They usually, Disney never, ever, ever reveals that until it's years later in a documentary behind the scenes or something. So that was very much different. But yes, D23 Expo.
Well, I can tell you this. We're going to be referencing probably a Hollywood Reporter article that goes into these, diversity officers, right? And especially the chief diversity officer for Disney, LaChandra Newton, but we will get there. But that article does make reference to the fact that what happened in Minneapolis in the summer of 2020, in the very beginning there, and we all know what we're referring to, that was a very big inflection point for the entire industry. Right, and probably for the better, and then probably maybe a little bit over a correction. But hey, you only get the benefit of that through hindsight and some other things. We know that they did rush out Tiana's Bayou Adventure quite a bit. Now they tried to say that they have, they had they were working on this. I can tell you right now, there was about one guy on that team who was just looking into feasibility of doing it and just kind of like saying like, hey, wouldn't this be an interesting concept? And before you know it, we have a piece of art that was rushed, and I'll show you why that might have been the case. And everybody gallivanting around, hey, we're going to go ahead and do this. Only a few weeks after what happened in Minneapolis. So we know it was... there may have been some, motivation there. Now, there are maybe issues with that, because now that you actually have committed yourself to something without actually kind of going through the details and parsing out what you're actually going to do, you end up sending mixed messages. For example, this is the first piece of concept artwork that they put out there when they announced this attraction. It's kind of funny because if you read the original Disney Press blog and you see it, they have this artwork kind of multiplied and spread out and stuff like that. And it's like, ooh, this is the big thing. And it's like, okay, clearly you weren't, working on this for quite some time if this is the only thing you actually have to show for it. And they were very vague in the terms that they used and what they were going to actually bring up. But we know it was rushed because, as you see here, Princess Tiana here is depicted in a certain way, right? And it gives a certain expectation of what we might actually see as audiences. Now, if you look at the most recent piece of concept artwork that they've showed for this attraction, you see that they've changed the look drastically of Tiana. And this is kind of what worries me about
styles, though. As the ride progresses, we could see both styles.
We could, and I'm not saying we're not. We absolutely could see that. But from what I understand, it's going to be right after that kiss sequence, which, if we follow, she is. We'll see if they do depict that scene there at the very forefront of the ride. Then I will agree with you. We will likely see that. But remember, the impression that they gave at first was that this is the form we'd be seeing her maybe throughout. Mm-hmm. And that's not exactly what's going to be happening here with this. And it's been illustrated to us. And this is kind of what worries me about the story group actually, the Stories Matter initiative, story group. I'm thinking Star Wars. The Stories Matter group actually handling this. Because I think the emphasis that is being placed on this, and they've showed their hand on this a couple of occasions, including with the artwork that you see in front of you, they're placing enhanced emphasis on certain aspects that are very thoughtful of certain particular groups, but maybe don't have necessarily the overall attraction in mind as a cohesive piece of story, as Jay is very he knows a lot about. Now, when they release this piece, they go a lot about her hairstyle and how it's a 1920s flapper style, right? And it should, it stretch the boundaries of black representation in a certain attraction and how hairstyle is depicted and so forth. Which is great. Don't get me wrong. That's awesome to hear, and I do enjoy that they're going over it with this kind of minute detail. But we still haven't heard very much of this attraction and its substance. And every single time I see the people behind Splash Mountain speak, They talk about everything else but the story, or bringing this IP to life, or showcasing Tiana's story.
They promised at D23. So if nothing's presented at D23, then that's the huge issue problem.
Oh,
but they keep promising D23. So.
Oh, I understand. And yeah, I do agree with you. If they don't show anything at D23 Expo, that's going to be something, right? But every single time they talk about this attraction, they talk about everything else other than it, which is quite interesting because I've never seen an attraction like this. I've been covering the Disney company for a long time. I can go through the design and thought process of every single other attraction, and it has never been depicted in this way. And then to actually have their roundtable discussion debuted on YouTube, have the dislikes and likes removed, comments removed. It's all very interesting. And I just kind of wonder, is this really about the attraction? Is this really about the IP? Because I think a lot of people are going to go into this kind of attraction with the expectation of what they saw here.
And
depicting Tiana's story.
And especially of what ride this is going to replace. Exactly. And I know a lot of people have difference of opinion as, you know, the storyline of Splash Mountain and what it's about and where it originates from. But I think we all can agree it's still a very popular attraction. It's like people are posting online, you know, 90-minute waits, 120-minute wait for Splash Mountain. So apparently it's still doing pretty good. Just the other day, it outbeat the wait time for Seven Dwarfs Mine Train at Magic Kingdom at Walt Disney World.
Which is profound because I don't believe Seven Dwarfs Mine Train necessarily reaches the... I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I don't believe it reaches the same capacity as Splash Mountain does. So that is interesting. Yeah. It does speak to its popularity.
The thing is, it appears it's going to happen, and it has to you have to get to a point where you're just going to accept it, or you're going to become toxic. So, you know,
except what? I'm sorry.
Except that this is happening, or people are going to become toxic.
Oh no! I don't necessarily disagree with you. I mean, by all indications, it is actually happening.
It's just my thing is because stories matter. I hope that they put on a spectacular. This has to be spectacular.
I agree with that.
The story has to like knock your socks off, so to speak. Where, I mean, it's a water ride, so I hope you already have your socks off. Otherwise, you're going to have a miserable day squashing through the park.
Knock your soggy.
Or if it's a hot day, that might feel good, though.
Yeah. But that it has to deliver.
Yeah. And, I agree.
And that's where I'm concerned about it because I want Disney to succeed. We all want Disney to succeed. Mm-hmm. We know we don't. And I think it's more so just of a guidance issue because since this is going to happen after that, I believe, Dre, you and I were talking about this earlier, where they're not even going to incorporate any of the music and the songs because it's already past tense of the film. And I was so looking forward to that if they were to have Dr. Facilier in there, again, the antagonist versus the protagonist, that you're reaching the top of that hill and you just get the bum, 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 bum. Are you ready? You know, like that's, I mean, I want that. I want to see the shadow creatures going all around right before you take that plunge. To me, that is not even just good storytelling, but you can use awesome technological imagery for that. You can really amp this thing. And I think that they're just so gung-ho on just trying to make this so perfect that it could be to the demise of this attraction where it's not going to settle right with audiences for all those reasons.
And that was my overall point. That's what I was leading to, is that there's a certain expectation with this attraction when it will debut that we're getting the story that we recognize from Princess and the Frog. But they have made that very clear in all of their talks, and I've listened to every single one of them, that is not what is going to be depicted here, that they're actually going to have original songs included that won't necessarily be in origin from the original film, which now you're creating two sets of expectations. On one side, it's going to be, hey, Princess and the Frog attraction. And the other, it's like, well, kind of. It's after the events of the story that you see there. So a lot of your favorite characters, like Dr. Facilier or I believe Ray, the Firefly, right?
Oh yeah.
They won't be represented here.
Hopefully
and it's
they'll
like
have bits and odes, little nostalgia bits. And odes,
I hope so.
Hopefully, with the music and characters.
I hope so, but I don't. I disagree with the assertion that or the assertion that us bringing it up and us, bringing up these issues and attempting to parse out with the very little that they've actually showed us is necessarily toxic.
No, not us. I'm just, in general, just what I'm seeing online and this Twitter. I hate to say it, but there's, I don't have fair numbers, but there just seems to be a constant circle of dwelling on this. And unfortunately, in stages of grief, many have to reach acceptance, because if not, then they, not you guys, but general, will become toxic.
I think I'll just share my thoughts about it, because I think I tick a lot of the boxes that all of you have already talked about. And by the way, I rarely come to conclusions. I like to live in the gray and accept that the gray exists.
Me too.
And just be a part of that, right? So first of all, I think Splash Mountain is a fantastic ride, right? Like, Splash Mountain is an engaging ride. I think that this now it's based off of material which I haven't even seen, by the way, but I've read enough about it to know that it's objectionable and that we should reject it as being good, right? However, the story that exists on that particular ride, removed from its original material, is a pretty intriguing story, because it's about a person who's being bullied, who has to go to the laughing place to avoid trauma, but then ultimately figures out how to overcome these people and turn the tables on the bullies, right? So it's an interesting kind of story about how you need to keep moving, how you need to be able to be cunning, how you need to, the laughing place is good, but it's not going to get you through all of your trauma. You're going to need more than that, probably. Now, am I reading too much into the story of Splash Mountain? Probably, but it's along those lines. Now, setting that aside, I love Princess and the Frog. It is actually one of my favorite animated Disney films. I think it's amazing. I think the fact that it's about entrepreneurship, so this is not the traditional princess who just wants to marry somebody who's rich. Tiana is literally saying, I'm the one who's going to make it. This is going to be about me, right? It's going to be about me succeeding in something that I'm trying to accomplish. Not only that, but it is a person of color in an environment where that is not going to be easy for her. That is going to be a hill to climb, right? And I think that the movie showcases that really well. I think that the way that they walk through all of that's really interesting. I think that they don't, Naveen is maybe a guy who's a little bit like wild, and he's not maybe as culture as like, he doesn't have the manners, let's put it that way, or he's not like the etiquette that you might see in the South at that time. But in the end, he's a fun character too, right? And it's this kind of cool love story. So I love Princess and the Frog. So when they announced this, I'm gonna say I actually am a fan of this change, but this comes with a large but in the middle of the statement. Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
We'll write a big but.
Exactly, huge.
A big graphic of a big but.
And I want to pick up on what Dre said, because I actually agree with Dre on this point. When the Incredicoaster was updated, I thought to myself, this is going to be cool. There's a lot of cool effects in this Incredicoaster. It used to be a ride that kind of hurt my back because I'm old, and the loop was a lot that was very intense. But now we're going to get a story that goes along with this ride. And I was so disappointed, because the latest Disney story at that time, that Incredicoaster, didn't go back to hearkening to the movies and what they were dealing with in the movies. They said, Jack has escaped and he's running around. There's no emotion related to that, right? There's no deep thing that I have to consider. This is not Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. This is not Snow White about whether or not you should trust people and who people really are, because they may present as one way, but they're actually a very different kind of, to your point, Aaliyah, a toxic person, right? Like, and so these are lessons that we're trying to teach kids. The only thing the Incredicoaster gave me was some kids are wild and they run away. And then it's fine. They're back when I finish the rest.
And then you get a bunch of Jacks on lollipop sticks.
Exactly. Yeah. So I hope that they don't do that, because Dre, I agree with you. If it's just about them finding a trumpet that was lost, that is not the story of Tiana. The story of Tiana is awesome, and they should put that in the ride.
That's where I feel like that to me is a bigger insult. That to me is a bigger insult to the character.
Yeah.
So it's like that's where they're so gung ho on saying, "Oh, we got to try to stick to inside this bubble." But look at the bigger bubble that you're creating by not expressing the story that is given to you. Yeah. You got it like on a silver platter. It's handed to you in golden ink. They could do so much with and again, Dre and I have talked about this a lot. The scope of the Splash Mountain attraction, they could put so much in there. That building is huge.
And let me just finish really quick by saying this too, because I totally agree with that statement. And the other thing I wanted to say was, if you take off your fan hat for just a minute, which is hard to do because I'm a huge fan myself, and I know you guys are really good at it because this is why I listen to the podcast, and you guys are fantastic at it. But if you're Disney, you're not making any merch off Song of the South. You're never going to make any merch off. And if you do, you're exploiting people. But if you rebrand this ride to Princess and the Frog, you can sell merch. So this is a huge money-making endeavor for them. They'll throw it at you as, well, we just want to be cautious with culture. And I don't think that that's inappropriate. I don't think that that's wrong. I don't think that that's disingenuous, but just keep in mind, they're going to make a lot more merch money when you get off this ride and you go to buy the Princess Tiana stuff, because you're going to go do that as opposed to Song of the South and Splash Mountain, which I bet you they're not selling a lot of merch out of that ride. So as much as I care about stories, there's also a business reason for doing this.
Go ahead, Alia.
Oh, I was going to say, okay, then definitely they need to pay attention to the voices such as you guys. And I've been very, like, I guess you could say, not as invested with this change, but I can tell because I don't know, it's just hard for me to explain.
And here's the thing. Here's the thing. There is a side of me. I am very excited to see that. I will admit, when I first heard this, I was like, no, you are not. I was literally going to fly out to Burbank and like picket it at, like, I was just going to be a one-man show in front of the Walt Disney Company arch, just like, no, you're not changing it. Nope. But I have to say, I'm very skeptical on what they're going to do. I hope they do it well. If they do it well and they put a good enough story with some kick-ass technological advancements that can really hone in this show building and really bring the Princess and the Frog and the characters to life, I really wish that they would have stuck to the origin of the story with all the songs, because that's what's going to be relatable to kids. They're going to know these characters by the songs, by the dialogue, where if you continue on where it may come up a little bit stale with the storyline, because you're creating something because you don't want to kind of go out of those boundaries. But if they were to, but still create the Princess and the Frog, I'm good with that. Yeah. And I honestly, I think we all can agree with the some of the issues that the ride itself has been dealing with, a lot of breakdowns and a lot of flooding. And so, I mean, the ride definitely needs to be refurbished. It does need a good maintenance, a lot of TLC. So that's good on that part. I just want really to see
the pragmatic reason for this too. But yeah, we want them to do it right, to do it correctly. It's just, unfortunately though, because of the likes being, you can't see them, likes down, up, down, comments. There's unfortunately bad actors and groups of downvoters and groups of wanting to be, I'm going to say it, racist, nefarious, that unfortunately that's in place. So yes, it's just I kind of just get concerned when there's people expressing concern, and then maybe they unknowingly will lock arms with such people like that. Whereas it's very important to make clear, no, you guys shut up. What we're just saying is we just want to make sure that this is done right and with quality. And yes, to be respectful to kind of what the Stories Matter group wants to uphold, instead of being so cautious that they're going to mess it up.
I think if you have a Stories Matter group, then we want that to be true. We want the story to matter, meaning that we want Tiana to be an entrepreneur who's struggling, especially in the environment that she's in the film. If it's just about a character losing a trumpet that we need to find and we kind of gallivant around, does that really matter? And that's what we want, right? We want the thing that says Disney is so good at pulling us into a story and saying like, yeah, love matters. Yeah. Anti-bullying matters. Yeah. Being for people as opposed to against people. Being good instead of evil. Those things all matter. And that's what we want from the ride. I think that's what we all would agree with.
I think so. But I'll say this: there may be certain impediments to getting there, and I think it's intrinsic into how the Stories Matter group operates. Unfortunately, they do put a lot of emphasis and energy and effort into this minutia, which does require effort, no question. But it unfortunately it supersedes some other aspects, and we've seen that. Go back and look at all the material that they put out, and very little of it is actually on the story of the attraction, bringing her story to life and going through it in a way that is going to be well received by fans. I again, if you go back into go back into the development of the Ariel attraction, for example. It was always on Ariel herself. It was always on, how Scuttle kind of sets up the whole thing, right? Tells this tale and how they want to bring Ursula to life and all that kind of stuff. It was great. The Stories Matter group going through this attraction specifically haven't focused on any of those aspects once. And it is kind of deeply concerning, because are you attempting to tell a story, or are you attempting to tell a narrative, which is much different? And I think what worries me about this attraction specifically is that there will be a certain expectation here, and I do think that expectation might not be in line with what the final execution of this attraction will actually be. My thing is, to go back to what you were saying, Jay, about Song of the South. What's tricky is that if you were to probably survey every single guest that actually came into Walt Disney World and survey them on what Song of the South actually was, I doubt that maybe less than 1% could actually tell you what Song of the South actually was. Not just have you seen the film, but do you even know what it is at all?
Right.
The idea that we're going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on something that only a very small proportion of audience members, maybe people who haven't even been to a Disney park, actually have issues with, may set things up in a way going forward where it can get very interesting very, very quickly. As WDW Pro alluded to. For example, and George, go ahead and share my screen once again. This story just came out recently. Disney World surveys ask guests to name, quote, insensitive attractions, hints at changes coming to Disney's Animal Kingdom. And Disney's Animal Kingdom is a really interesting one, because out of all of Disney's properties around the world, I don't think there is another property that includes so much in terms of different cultures, regions, diverse peoples all around the world. So it's a very kind of interesting kind of theme park in that aspect. It makes references on parts of Asia, parts of Africa, and so forth, and that extends out to the Animal Kingdom Lodge and Resort. But it said this: Disney asked guests to assign terms to the current attractions and experiences, from, quote, iconic to boring. Disney clearly wanted to learn more about what guests think of the current lineup of attractions and experiences. Interestingly, Disney also asked the question, or asked guests to note, I should say, if the attraction or experience was, quote, insensitive. From this survey, quote, insensitive was described as perceived as disrespectful to the audience. And you can see how they actually did it right here. It's a checkbox, and guests can check what applies to how they feel towards a specific attraction. It goes from iconic, dated, boring, personal favorite, immersive, or not familiar, none of these. But it first starts out with the insensitive checkbox. And I just think about how many cultures that are actually referenced or represented in Disney's Animal Kingdom, and I go, oh my gosh, like that would be an unbelievably monumental task if attempting to change these things in order to not potentially offend any particular group. And now with Joe Rohde gone, who Joe Rohde was, I mean, this was his park, and anything that was going to be changed in it, anything that was going to be added to it, you got to go through him. Now he's gone from Disney. And so what does that necessarily mean for a place like Disney's Animal Kingdom, which worked extremely hard in order to include and represent so many of these cultures and diverse people to the best extent that they possibly could, and with the most reverence that could possibly be given. This is what we kind of started this conversation out with. What is the line here? Where do we draw that line? How do we draw that line? And how do we actually go about correcting anything before it?
Because we were actually brainstorming the fact of like, what if they were to go this route, what could they possibly want to change? And we were starting from attractions like with Expedition Everest, because the queue line for that is all about like in the Himalayas, in the Asian culture, you know, the artifacts and what have you. And then you go on this ride and it depicts a mythological creature. Well, is that what they're proclaiming to as being insensitive for some groups and cultures? Then you have just the Asia land itself. You have Africa with Harambe, and where a lot of it is depicted of how it actually looks in Africa. Does that make it sensitive to people walking around saying, oh, I've been to Africa, my family lives in Africa, you know, this is sensitive to me? Is that the approach that they're taking as far as why they're asking this specifically for Animal Kingdom? Because I think, as Dre had put it, Animal Kingdom, I believe, out of all 4 of Walt Disney World parks, has the most world culture and culture diversity implemented within the park grounds itself, as far as utilizing that for attractions and lands go. So is this what they're trying to possibly change, where it just becomes more Disney IP like the other parks? Sorry, Alia, you were going to say something.
Oh, thank you. I was just going to say, I think what the data point JPEG's going to look at most is what the majority of the general public, general audience, general tourists that visits Walt Disney World believe. So if the majority of them say something's insensitive, then he's going to pay attention to that the most. I don't think he's going to be, especially with the money involved, to change anything. I don't think he's going to be looking at really any other data point except that one. He's going to feel like there's something to it if the majority of the tourists visiting Walt Disney World feel something's insensitive.
But we already have an example of him doing quite the opposite with Splash Mountain. As relayed before, I could probably survey everybody as far as, have you even heard of Song of the South? And that would be a hard no. And yet we're going to spend upwards of $100 million per attraction to actually overdo it, because a very, very small proportion of guests actually want this to be changed at all.
Well, who knows what's happening behind the scenes? We know Stories Matters Group is weakening. There's signs of that. And also, though, too, he's very much about the amount of money spent. So, I mean, who knows? He may be very much listening to concerns such as what we're presenting, but there's also those factors happening, too.
I think if I were personally Chapek, I would never release a survey like this. And I'll tell you why. Because at what point do you say the percentage of guests who think this is insensitive is high enough? It's the question itself is sort of offensive. Like, do I say 5% of people is enough? Do I say 10% of people? Do I have to wait till 20? So I'm cool with offending 19% of the people, but as soon as it's 20% of the people, I'll change it. Like, that's a very, very tough line to walk if you're a decision maker.
Yeah.
So I personally would never release a survey like this. I think you can get better data if you go through the focus group setting and say, like, I'm just going to select like these types of people. I can get a wider range of opinions from people who are actually affected. Because, like, I've never lived in another country. So if you come in and ask me if one of these things was insensitive because of the nationality that the person is, the only thing I can do at that point is troll or give you an opinion that may not even be accurate to anything that you would care about. So it's weird to me to see a survey like this, because I go, I don't know how you can execute this well. Like, it seems like a very lose-lose proposition from my standpoint personally. And I think if you go back to like what you were saying, Dre, in regards to Splash Mountain versus Tiana's Bayou Adventure, I think that, to me, that's a little bit easier to sell because you actually have an IP, a Disney IP that is an original Disney. So we're not talking about Marvel. We're not talking about purchased IP. We're talking about an original story that Disney has done, and incorporating that back in, I think, makes a lot of sense. If they said they were going to change Splash Mountain to a Black Widow ride, now I would be like, what are we doing? Like, come on, I don't want a Black Widow ride. Like, no, granted, now I'm not saying that based off of the character. I'm saying that based off of the last film, which I just didn't think was very good. The character, I think, is awesome. So you could do a right. I don't want to suggest that, but I'm just saying I don't want more purchased IP. I would like more original IP. So that one doesn't offend me quite as much. But I do agree with you that playing the game of saying how many people are offended is a dangerous game to play. It'd be better to take an internal group of people like the Stories Matter group and say, we're in charge of telling the best possible stories with the most amount of inclusion we can have, and not just going around. Because if the Stories Matter group said, well, we need to poll people, I would say, then you're not doing your job, actually, because your job is to not poll the general audience, because they're going to give you, I think, garbage information. More people will troll on this survey than will actually express what they're
maybe
really upset about. So I would rather just see Disney kind of not react so much and take the reins and say, this is the area, this is the direction that we're moving in.
But when you have significant investments, like, maybe changing out whole sections of or whole areas of Disney's Animal Kingdom, I would think that you need some data point to actually get to the answer. Now, I do agree with you. Maybe this survey is not the way you go about that at all.
Yeah.
But with the significant cost of investment, I would think you need something in order to say, okay, you know what, this is worth doing. Here we go. Now, you bring up an interesting point as well. What percentages are we working with here? I mean, is 5% accurate? Is it below? Is it above? And now now it gets really, really tricky. Just like with Tiana's Bayou Adventure, though, I mean, you can start to overthink things as well. One of the big reasons why they're going with a new story for the Tiana's Bayou Adventure instead of an established one like what we saw in Princess and the Frog is because when that film originally came out, they got a little bit of criticism where you have the first Black Princess and she's not an actual Black Princess represented. She's a frog for a majority of that film. And I think they wanted to get away from that with what they're doing now here with a brand new story. But again, though, there's going to be certain expectations that go along with that, and that might not be in line with what ultimately the version of the attraction that we actually get. I do agree with you, Ollie. I think with that one specifically, I do agree that Splash Mountain has needed a rework for a long, long time. Ever since they added in the kind of like this fall protection thing. Oh boy, one guy gets injured on Space Mountain, and now we have to completely look at every single other attraction. That's besides the point.
Is that LA law, or not LA, California law you were referring to? That there's a kind of a fall kind of, or people, the whole
It's
people
actually not-
mover thing? You can't grab onto it or something.
Yeah, it's not a law. It's kind of like a mandate by OSHA. I believe they found Disney guilty because inadequate fall protection was present, and I believe it was an internal policy to go through all their attractions and ensure that fall protection actually exists. Well, for Splash Mountain, that was really bad because there's just some areas where fall protection can't really feasibly exist. And because it can't exist, maintenance workers are unable to service that attraction up to its full standards and its full needs because there's no way for maintenance workers, between days, right, to properly service that attraction. They literally can't get to the areas, the certain lighting rigs and the certain audio animatronics that they need to get access to in order to fully service that. So I'm hoping that Tiana's Bayou Adventure will remedy that problem. I would think that they would, but for that example, I think a more nuanced approach. Splash Mountain, I do think, needs an overhaul in some regard, in some capacity, and that's why I was initially kind of excited about what they might be actually doing there, because it might mean that that attraction stays up in tip-top form between refurbishments, as it unfortunately now is not prone to do. So hopefully they remedy that issue and things like that. But it's just, when I see surveys like this,
if they don't, shame on them, because that to me is the pragmatic utilitarian reason to do this, is to make sure for maintenance and all that things are more feasible. So
sure, yeah, and I I look forward to see how they might remedy these issues with this attraction. But I just, when I see them go and talk about hairstyles and how they're represented in a theme park attraction, when I see surveys like this, when I hear stories, and I did some investigation on WDW Pro's claim on the list and what it actually involves, and he's quite accurate with that. And one of those things is the Main Street names and so forth. And that
cannot happen. No.
I know but it's like, when I see stuff like that, I'll give you another example of things that we've been seeing manifest itself into the theme park space with Story Matters specifically. There is a show at the American Adventure in Epcot that goes through kind of the American history, if you were. In the lobby there are these exquisite art pieces that have been there since the park's inception in, I believe, October 1st, 1982?
82.
Right, they have been there for quite a while, 40 years. Recently, some of those exquisite pieces that are museum quality were removed, and in their place were put advertisements for sale. And the reason that was done was to fulfill a certain diversity quota that the Stories Matter group has. So we lost out on exquisite art pieces, things
museum
that
quality
were
level.
Museum quality level, things that were done masterfully, and have replaced them with corporatized product.
That's where it feels to me a lot of the stuff that they're deciding on doing is where it's sugar-coated, bubble gummed down as a replacement, because it just feels like everything now has to have an IP attached to it. Rather than let something be of what it is, whether it's something that's part of history, whether that's something part of the past. It's like, rather than try to configure it within today's time era so it still can be respectful to everyone around them, it's like, okay, well, let's just remove it and throw an IP there that literally has nothing to do with what this particular attraction or show or ride is about. That's where it feels like Disney is just kind of slacking off at the wheel, so to speak. It's like, I'm just so used to them being so intricate into detail. So again, because they always said it starts with the story. And it's like, and as Jay had mentioned it earlier, it just seems like we want the story to matter. That's why they're called The Story Matters. But when you're using it for a particular matter other than the story, then it contradicts of what you're trying to accomplish.
Becomes something else.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to propose a solution that I think that we would all have loved, right? Because here's the tension. Here's the tension that they created in us. They took museum quality art pieces, which I haven't seen, so I won't even comment on whether or not that was a good decision or a bad decision. But I will say this: they did it in what attraction you said, Dre?
The American Adventure at Epcot.
The American Adventure. So what they were saying is what exists in terms of America is we don't want to highlight that anymore, maybe. So we're going to bring in another IP to change that, right? The problem with that is that those art pieces were probably fairly accurate to the lived American experience, I'm assuming, right? It wasn't like they put up propaganda necessarily. Maybe it was a little bit propaganda-y, but we'd see. And they replaced that with IP, a specific type of IP. Now, what I would have loved to have instead, and I bet you guys are on the same page as me, and I bet a lot of the listeners are and the viewers are too, but what if we actually they had that giant bandstand, right? What if we'd had a jazz festival and we had said, we're celebrating part of America's history? Because guess what? Jazz music, predominantly invented by the Black community in America, a complete transformation of music. Let's celebrate that by having a jazz festival that takes place in the giant amphitheater. We're going to invite people up. They always have really cool performers that perform at that stage during some of the festivals and things. That's something that I feel like you're not taking away, you're adding. And you're adding a lot of cool flavor. You're adding a lot of cool experiences that we could have, but you're not taking away from what we already have as well. That would have been, to me, a more impactful solution. And it would have been something that I think most people would have gotten behind. I mean, you're not like Alia said, there's always going to be the toxic people who are like, well, I'm not going to go to the jazz thing. Well, okay, fine. Don't have a good time. Like, be a miserable person if you want. But it's when you remove something and replace with something else that it's like, wait a minute, what are you trying to? You can have both messages.
Sure.
But what you sound like you're saying is you're not allowed to have that message. And I think that's where it starts to get dicey. It's where more people start to become uncomfortable.
And to your point, Jay, Disneyland actually recently did have a jazz festival, and it was actually quite delightful. They had a jazz-inspired exhibit going through the history of jazz music and how it, developed in certain parts of America, and they had that at the old ESPN Zone area, which was nice to see. It was nice to see how deeply they went into that. Also, too, to kind of put a good side on this, and Jay, and I think you're right. There's a right way to do this, and I think it is to adding to and being kind of consistent with that story. In the Great Moments of Mr. Lincoln over here at Disneyland, they did something similar, but they did it in a different way. They actually added a bust of Frederick Douglass in alongside Lincoln. Yeah. And it was a remarkable bust, remarkable piece, and there's a plaque there that actually goes into how Frederick Douglass actually helped, inspire Lincoln to do what he ultimately did. Right, he was kind of a person in the ear of Lincoln to attempt him to do certain things in the White House for the benefit of the Black community and so forth. Right, awesome. And I thought, okay, that's how you do it right there.
That's how you do it.
Yeah, you bring honestly, up history, and
that's the common misconception with a lot of people is, and it may not be, there could be the haters out there, the trolls, the people that just like to cause stuff. But then there is a group of people where, such as me, like when I said of how they brought Soul into the American Adventure Pavilion, that doesn't mean I don't like Soul. I actually think that was one of the best Pixar films that was made before we got all this other crap after it. And I'm sorry, Pixar, but it is what it is. I love Soul. So when it just doesn't, the way that it's depicted inside the pavilion, that's what I have a problem with. I don't have a problem with Soul. And I'll take it one step further, Jay, that when you mentioned about the having like a jazz band, why not have different kinds of bands through different eras of the American history? So one night you can have jazz, another night you could have rock and roll. You can like pick like a time era within the American history, and that could be the overall theme outside or inside of the American Adventure. And as you said, it's adding rather than take away or erase or switch and change, replace, just add to it.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
And I don't
That's
want
consistent with that story as well.
Yeah, it's consistent with the story as well. That's huge. And I don't want to derail the conversation too much, but just really quickly going back, one of the things I thought of when we were talking about that survey that talked about like, is this insensitive? My first thought was, if I'm being honest, I feel like Joe Rohde immersed himself in the different cultures and put that into the animal kingdom in a way that seems pretty authentic to me. Now, granted,
he absolutely did.
Maybe I'm wrong, but what I was going to say was, when I go to Epcot and I go around the World Showcase, that to me seems like a lot more. What would I say? I don't want to say that it's making fun of the different cultures involved, but it seems like they're more caricatures of the culture as opposed to immersions of the culture. And so to me that brings up the question of like, okay, well, if are we? I mean, I'm just thinking in my head, like, think of Canada, right? Like, Canada is a very stereotypical Canada, and some
maple
of the
syrup. No,
yeah, exactly, right. I mean, a lot of those areas are sort of caricatures of their real life counterparts, and so it just feels it does feel a little awkward where it's like, well, why are you now applying this to the animal kingdom though? Like, why aren't you applying it? Are you going to apply it to Epcot, or what about Canada could be is different than whatever ride you're at, attraction you're asking about in Animal Kingdom? Like, those are the kind of questions that I think you need to be able to consider at some point in time and go,
sure,
like, why one way or the other? So this is where the gray area starts making me uncomfortable, right? There's some things that I go, this makes a lot of sense. Like, actually, I think that we have moved to a place in culture where this is a good change. But there's always those little things where it feels like somebody is. I think that what I tend to say, and by the way, I just did a video yesterday about why you should not write with an agenda in mind. You should write to tell a compelling story, but you should actually test your agendas along the way, right? Make sure that your agendas are realistic. And
I like that. I like that.
But so I think if you write for an agenda, you are aiming for propaganda. And that's the line. That's the line. The line is propaganda. Like, are you doing this because you're like teaching people about a real lived experience? Or are you just trying to get me to change my mind on something by presenting things in a way that actually is not even true to life? It's not even true to life anymore. The American experience, you removed cool artwork and you put in fiction. Right, you put in fiction. Now, there's an argument to be made that the artwork that was in there was fiction. that's a possibility, right? But what I mean is, you put in a cartoon character. What I would have preferred is if you said, we're going to rotate these out with some of the really amazing real life jazz musicians, not the cartoon, like real life jazz musicians. That we're going to rotate these in and out because we want to celebrate a greater lived experience of the American history. I think that would have been more interesting.
And that's consistent with the American Adventure and how it depicts kind of lived experiences throughout America. You know, they have these maquettes of like, people, within that history adding to what is kind of the American tapestry and the different cultures, beliefs, ideologies that really form the American adventure as we all kind of live it. I don't think, to your point, Jay, I don't think Soul is necessarily consistent with that, but adding something, that represents, Black culture like jazz or any of the, other things.
Do civil rights paintings, right?
Well, and I think that's where they're kind of already leaning towards, like what they did with Frozen in the Norway Pavilion, and I think eventually, there was going to be another pavilion when they were supposed to make the animated film Gigantic, and Gigantic fell through, so the pavilion didn't come through. So they're already showing signs where are they going to actually do this with every single country, as you had mentioned, Jay, that if they put an IP attached to everything, I'm not saying subtleties, and I love the Frozen attraction. I love Frozen Ever After in Norway. But if you cripple the notion of having all IPs in every little thing that you do, and this is where it harkens back to Animal Kingdom, are you going to have a park that is so realistic because it's about conservation, it's about protecting the land, helping out the animals, but you're just going to make everything IP. Is it going to water down of what makes Animal Kingdom so unique, or what would make World Showcase so unique? Like every country you walk into, oh, there's an IP there, there's an IP there. It's like, I don't mind subtleties, but it's like it even harkens back to the films. It's like everything now is a reboot, a remake. It's like, where is the craftsmanship? Where is the original story? That's what I love, and that's what makes Epcot so unique. You travel the world because you want to see these countries. You want to see the cultures. I loved walking around World Showcase and meeting the people of the countries. You hear them with their accents. You see them in their attire. It's like you really feel like you're actually in that country. Well, you're talking about that you want to be quote unquote sensitive to people. Well, what are you doing when you're knocking at these cultures and countries by diluting it with, I hate to say it, with IP, that unnecessary IP?
Yeah, and it's to your point. I know, Jay, you got to go real fast. So I'll be quick with this, but especially for the reasons where you don't want to offend anybody. Let's just use IP because IP is inoffensive at the outset, right? And it's like, a great example is Animal Kingdom. Actually, Joe Rohde has always been against the idea of adding Zootopia to Disney's Animal Kingdom, because in his mind, it's like, hey, that's really a human story just told with animals, but not really a story of animals about animals as what was the intention behind with Disney's Animal Kingdom. But I can see where now it's like, well, let's just do Zootopia, because Zootopia, it's inoffensive. It's just about animals. There's no necessarily representation or instances where representation could be portrayed insensitively or not. It's just an IP. It's animals go. And it's just like that kind of stuff too is like, maybe we should reevaluate that. I understand, hey, I want Zootopia as much as anybody else.
Yeah.
But if we're getting it just because, we don't want to necessarily, run the risk of offending anybody, well, that's something different as well.
Yeah.
Hey, I will knock down anybody to get my hands on a pair of those gazelle antlers. I want a pair of those.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll say this. I do have to take off, and I apologize. I should have done the calculation on the timing a little bit better.
You're fine.
But it's been
worries.
a fantastic conversation, and you guys are all great, and I love talking with you. The thing I will say is this: I do think that there's a flip side to this coin, and sure. I don't want to diminish anyone's lived experience. I do not want. I want everyone to feel comfortable in the parks. I want there to be as much inclusion in the parks as possible. However, I will say this. I also think that we do have a responsibility to really take a deeper look at what we are offended by and whether or not that was intended by Disney. I'll just say this, and this is a funny example. This is not a real example, and there could be a bunch of people in the comments that have really real examples, and I don't want to diminish those by saying this. So I'm going to give all those caveats, but I'm going to say, as a male human being that does not have hair. I am often portrayed. People like me are often represented as villains, right? Like that's almost always who's the villain? Who's the bald guy? The bald guy's the villain, right? And I will tell you, yeah, exactly, JPEG, exactly. And
to both of you guys.
Yeah, well, and I would tell you that if I felt like I was offended by that, that would likely be because of some insecurities on my part. Some wrestling with who I am and my security as a human. I don't wrestle with those, which is why I use it as a joke. But I do think that there is a responsibility for us not to go, well, we can't offend Jay by having more bald villains. We can't give Thanos hair, redo the CG. Thanos needs hair. Like I don't even want that. And so I do think that we need to look at these stories and this is what the Stories Matter group should do. They should say things like, Are bald men really offended by this, or is that just are we overstepping our bounds and we're getting into territory that they're not offended? It's fine.
Right.
Make Thanos bald. It's great. And I think that somebody needs to do that work because if you find any one person and be like, that person's offended, we better change it. I don't think that that's fair to the stories. I don't think it's fair to the original creators of the stories. I don't think it's fair to Disney as a company. And so I hope that the Stories Matter group will give us more things like jazz festivals that really showcase what the lived human experience was for those artists and things like that, as opposed to saying, well, now I'm gonna put this in quotation marks because they haven't said this, but what if they did? America bad, put soul up, right? America bad, take down names and put up different names. That's where we're getting into a territory where it's like, we can criticize anything across the spectrum of things to criticize. Show me a perfect person. You won't, because they don't exist, right? So like, we got to be careful about how far we go with that. And I think that that's a bigger picture part of this conversation. So I will leave you all with that. And thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure to join you guys.
Aloha.
That's perfect. Oh, and before you go, I know you have to go. Can you just give our listeners and viewers where they could find you on social media?
Yeah, absolutely. So just check it out right here, down here, at Jay Sherer, SHERER, with the Story Geeks. So go find me on the Story Geeks YouTube channel, the Story Geeks podcast. I'm constantly trying to understand from stories what they're trying to tell us and how the creators went about trying to do that. So that's generally what the channel is all about. We had OG and Dre join me for an episode of Kenobi, which was phenomenal. Really enjoyed those conversations.
Can't wait to do that stuff again.
Oh, yeah. We got to do it again. But in the meantime, I will let you guys go. Thanks for the conversation. Continue this good work. Yeah, absolutely. Take it easy, guys.
Thanks, Jay.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, Jay is great. He is phenomenal. He is awesome. Very, very thoughtful in his approach. I love his work a lot. Yeah, I think that's the overall message there. It's just like, hey, look, there are some things where you can actually genuinely enhance an attraction. Like Great Moments, Mr. Lincoln, I think has been enhanced by the inclusion of Frederick Douglass. I do genuinely believe that. I believe some things are, maybe, did you really add? Did you really take away? I don't know. Maybe it's not worth messing with if it's just a lateral move. And in some ways, maybe you could end up damaging something that's really precious and that was consistent with the story attempting to be portrayed, and maybe something that's not. So I do agree with him. I think it's kind of a fine line of going back and forth here, and hopefully the Stories Matter group approaches this in a way that is nuanced and that can be additive rather than detract from any of these stories. I guess we'll have to see.
And that's what the Walt Disney Company was completely founded on, is challenging obstacles and making a difference of something that was completely out of the box. And when everyone said it couldn't be done, Walt was there to prove them wrong. So it's like, I hope that they do the same thing. I hope that they live off of Walt's philosophy and ways, that it will continue on with the company that he has built from the ground up, from practically nothing. So I want Disney to succeed. We all want them to succeed. We want to see, top-notch, kick-ass rides, attractions where it's like the stories do matter, and we want to see that come to life. But we want to see it done in the integrity of where you're not just taking the easy route just to get it done, sign, seal, deliver, and that's it. You want everything to be memorable. You want it to last forever. And that's what we could hope, as a company moving forward, that Disney can find that place again where they're just gung-ho and go for the, I guess, how should I actually say this? Go balls to the wall here, people. That's what I'm trying to say.
Oh, there you go. Now, one more thing I think we should probably tackle just real fast. This whole LaTondra Newton story. The Hollywood Reporter put out an article, and if you want to share my screen one last time, George, you absolutely can. the Hollywood Reporter put out an article. Now I would go up and show the title of it and everything, but it was kind of hard to find the spot because it's a very long article. But they had a whole breakdown of chief diversity officers or people at the heads of or in certain divisions within corporations who handle the diversity, inclusion, and equity initiative for those certain companies and corporations. And one company that was featured here was Disney. And anybody who doesn't know Latondra Newton is the chief diversity officer for the Walt Disney Company, and she is like right below Bob Chapek in terms of seniority status. It's a pretty prestigious position and an overarching one, and I thought this was very interesting what they had to say about that. Well, I guess I will go up and show you the title because I've lost my place in this whole thing. Hang on. Okay, hang on. It's right here. Okay, yeah. It said this, and I thought this was really, really interesting and worth actually talking about even just for a moment. Let's see. Where should I begin reading? Okay, yeah. On March 2nd, CDO Latondra Newton sent out an internal statement. This was following the kind of Don't Say Gay controversy in Florida. HB 1557, as we refer to it here as. It said this. It said, she titled it saying, showing support for our LGBTQ plus community, promising that the company would discuss the, quote, issues of concern at gatherings scheduled for March 22nd and April 13th. Quote, our hope in having a CDO would be to hold the company to account rather than release statements that towed the company line, right? A response to Disney leadership signed by the, quote, the queer LGBTQIA plus employees of the Walt Disney Company and their allies. That was posted on social media March 8th. Quote, we need an advocate at a figurehead. Very interesting. That was actually in response to Latondra Newton's initial statement that was put out there. So there's a little bit of friction on that end. Some people are wanting the company at that point to do more. Some people actually want to do, maybe less. Maybe they've gone too far. And that kind of speaks to this kind of internal, as I call it, the Disney Civil War that's actually taking place in terms of ideology. But here's was the most interesting thing here. It said, Disney declined to make Newton available for comment, but her counterparts acknowledged the skepticism that surrounds the job. Quote, we're trying to make a change within a capitalist corporate situation, so you have to be a lot of different people for a lot of different people, says Netflix Myers, which is the kind of equivalent to Latondra Newton's position over there at Netflix. I thought that was really, really interesting and worth bringing up even just for a moment. Alia, what do you have to say about this?
This is huge because pretty much the article is about her. You could say she was the most powerful of all these people, and yet she was declined from speaking. That's very, very interesting. And the ones that did speak are from companies that have made it clear they're going to be more central. I mean, they've been obvious about it. Everything from Disney is just rumors and words from the inside, but
sure,
these companies have been obvious about it. We're going to be neutral. If some things that we do upset you, you better go somewhere else. We're going to be moderate. And so this is very interesting to me. This signifies that she's been weakened, you could say. And
sure, that,
yes, Chapek is definitely transitioning to a more neutral, moderate position.
It speaks to a lot of those things, and the reason why it does is because Latondra Newton, the only people above her that could even make a decision like that, is basically Bob Chapek or chairman of the board Susan Arnold. That really is it. That's how high her position goes, which was really important why we described that before. So to actually have something like this, say, Disney declined to make Newton available, it's also the author attempting to assert that, yeah, it was somebody at Disney who actually did this. It wasn't Newton, it was somebody else, putting the onus somewhere else. That also speaks to what may have happened here, and I think it's really, really interesting. George, what do you have to say about it?
Yeah, I agree with you. It's very It's very. I'm trying to think of the word, but I'm going to use the word iffy. I use that word a lot when I can't think of the appropriate word to say. It's just something that, again, yeah, for Disney to say that she is not available, yada yada yada, and that means it would have to be someone on a much higher power than she is. Well, there's not too many people up on that scale that can do that other than, as you had mentioned, Dre, either the CEO or someone from the board. So and obviously it is one of them or multiple people from the board, that it puts a blank statement on, this is the route that we would like to move forward to, is to not really pick one side or the other. We're just like kind of like middle ground. And this is where we're going to move forward, because, again, you pick sides too much, it could end up causing more friction, either way. So it's like, just keep it in the middle where it can proclaim to everybody. And that's what the Walt Disney Company is fun on. It's to all who come to this happy place, welcome. It's everybody.
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's quite the point there, and that speaks to the other thing that's going on at Disney parks right now. But unfortunately, we don't have enough time to get to that. Trust me, when OG is back on, we will. But it's interesting. Do we see this position, the CDO position, or the equivalent in these other corporations, changing, as if to say, "Hey, it's fine to represent different cultures, different peoples, different backgrounds, and all that, and to do it in a way that's inoffensive to those people and takes those sensibilities into account from those groups and individuals and people. But can we do it in a nonpartisan way? Can we do it in a non-political way?
I think it would be very interesting, because Disney used to spearhead all of those motions with companies. Everyone followed Disney. It was like, if Disney did it, it was like, it's okay. We can do it. We'll survive. Everyone. It was almost like Disney was the guardian of all those decisions for all those companies, even though they had nothing to do with those other companies. But it was a safe bet that everyone followed Disney. And it feels like, as time went on, Disney kind of backpedaled on that, so where it's like no one really knows what they're doing. But I think if Disney kind of spearheads this movement where it's for the best for everybody, and I'm not just saying one particular group or the other, for everybody, I emphasize that on everybody, that
Sure.
it could potentially lead for other companies to say, hey, you know what, Disney's making this revolutionary change to where you can be sensitive to a certain point, but we could still put out great product. We don't have to go around this. And Disney is saying, you know what, we're going to stay in the middle. So if Disney can do it, so can we. So, and I would love for that to happen, because it would relieve so much tension off of these companies, off of everything. And again, I would love to see Disney on the top again. They would be the ones to make that change happen, not just for themselves, but for everybody else.
Alia?
Let's see. So it's going to be where it's more of a. I think the idea is that the position is more of gives advice, meets with people, general idea, gives opinions to the CEO and the board when they're intrigued. But the issue was that originally that her position had a lot of power and connected with Rice and Reimagine Tomorrow. And so that's
directly impacted the creation of content, for example.
Right.
And,
that's definitely changing to what Jay was speaking about, the difference between telling a good story that has a powerful message that can even be inclusive and transformative, or propaganda. And she and Rice and Reimagine Tomorrow were more in the propaganda area.
And we could even see, because of what happened with Rice, so we could start to see very subtle things happening within the company that is leading towards what we're speculating.
Well, I don't think that was subtle.
Yeah.
I think that was definitely
and she
blood.
knows. She knows she can't
Yeah.
push things too far. She'll get fired.
True.
She's just going to. I don't think she's going to do anything behind the scenes because if it's traced back to her, she can be fired. Her only alternate route would be to resign and then do like a tell-all interview. But even with that, she'd have to be careful because of a non-disclosure agreement. So, and Chapek and Arnold and the board know this. So,
and I think too. I think Chapek's whole thing that's going to go forward is, hey, look. We can be, I think, representative of multiple groups and you represent their stories in a way that doesn't offend anybody or is consistent with the certain sensibilities that people have. That's fine. But like you said, Alia, we're not going to produce just propaganda that might lose us money. It still has to be a profit-driven venture at the outset.
Shareholders, return of investment.
Right, exactly. We got to have a little bit of return investment here. We can't just create, art house films that maybe necessarily spearhead a certain ideology at the expense of what we create here. Or I'm sorry, at the expense of our bottom line, so to speak. So it's like, yeah, I think that's appropriate. Like you said at the top of the show, they create 4-quadrant films. And they do it for a reason. And I don't think Chapek is interested in getting. I mean, he said as much before the HB 1557 thing popped off. He's like, look, we're not going to be a political football, and we're not necessarily going to get in the muck and the mire here, where we can be weaponized by sides and stuff like that. No, we just got to produce good content, and something that doesn't necessarily push anybody away. And I think that right there, I think getting back to those kind of previously established values before Bob Iger took the company in a little bit more of a radical direction, I think is the safest bet. I think is the right move here. And maybe that will be reflected also in the Stories Matter group as well. We're going to have to see how that whole kind of thing shakes out. From what I understand, there's some Chapek is leading up to some big policy changes when it comes to content delivery and so forth with the Walt Disney Company. That'll be coming anywhere between November and March, from what I understand. And I think that'll be very, very interesting and really will set the tone for the company going forward. But a lot of changes here, and if you can read between the lines, you know what's taking place and what's going to happen eventually.
But I would like to see that even if this policy change is between November and March, they're already setting the stage, so to speak, and I'm going to say that literally and figuratively setting the stage because
D23 Expo.
D23 Expo.
I know where he's going with this.
The Expo. Worlds collide. Things will change. Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's going to be good. And speaking to the Expo, I'm hearing that San Diego Comic-Con, for example, right? I think, Alia, did you make this point where, I don't remember where I heard this point from, but it was like San Diego Comic-Con might go over things that they have done or allude to things that they will do, but D23 Expo will set the tone on what they will do, and that's in all aspects of the company: Marvel, Lucasfilm, Pixar, Disney, parks, everything like that. So it should be a really really interesting couple of days there in Anaheim.
Comic-Con, as Alia had put it, where it's like they already announced stuff that's already announced, where the D23 Expo, they take us into the unknown.
No. Although, because Thor 4 is underperforming, Feige might take something, a surprise he was planning for D23. One of them might announce it at SDCC, but otherwise it's going to be, I think primarily the focus will be on Black Panther, Wakanda Forever. We'll probably definitely get a teaser, a trailer, and then pretty much things, yes, exactly, that were already announced, verified, and then D23 exactly will be the unknown.
Yeah, exactly. Deadpool 3, X-Men movie. I don't know, man. It's there's so many different.
I don't know, with all the Disney Plus announcements and Ryan Reynolds having fun, I won't be surprised if Deadpool 3 is going to be.
Well, there's also talks.
At SDCC.
Well, there's also talks about the cast of the potential Fantastic Four that's supposed to come out.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Oh,
So
that's interesting too.
We shall see about that because we already got a little taste of it with Doctor Strange with the Multiverse of Madness, where we got a few characters in there that was never shown in this version of the MCU. So it's going to be very, very interesting over the next couple months moving forward. Big changes coming for the company, and we're all sitting here just let it be good. Just
Yeah,
keep that positivity flowing.
And if you feel a little bummed with something not announced at SDCC, just hang in there. D23 is around the corner. It'll be September, that first second weekend of September before you know it. So 9th through the 11th. So
Yep.
There you go.
And I will say, though, I mean, I love a lot of realism and things that actually happen where they can incorporate in the attractions. But I'm telling you right now, if I happen to see a gator chasing after a horned instrument going down the river, I'm gone. I'm done. Bye.
you won't have a choice if you're in the middle of a log in a flume ride.
Yeah, I guess not. We'll have to see. George, I'm really I really want to know what you have to say after you see the Disney Parks panel, what your overall impressions were, maybe what the tone of the room was.
Absolutely. I'm going to be there for the expo. I'm going to be on location, and I already spoke to the guys that as soon as everything is announced, I'm going to do my very best to try to get as much information out to them as possible. Possibly, maybe even record something that could be used, because I would love to get all the information out as quickly as possible on the OG 55 channel, along with everyone else and their grandmother there that's going to be releasing the same stuff. But I think we deserve to have a little bit of that moment.
I think they have you though put your phone away or like in a bag and like only like
for the studio
or the
panels.
studios. Yeah,
okay,
the parks,
not the parks.
Okay. Are allowed to have it out.
That's a little bit more open. Okay. Good.
Yeah. So for the parks, I'm going to be
panel. They're like, here's a bag. Put the
There's
phone
no
away.
way. Yeah.
Or give it to us, something like that. Only reporters.
Just my luck. They're going to put me in behind a 6'6" guy that's like blocking everything.
Exactly. We don't want George to see what's going on here. Okay, just him though. Everybody else.
You're gonna be all standing, so it's gonna be tapping your shoulder.
Yeah. Hey, you know what? For me to get on that screen, it's like, hey, if it's with his permission, I'll sit on his shoulders. Like he could just like hold me there. I'll be his child at Disneyland for the day.
Fantastic, George. That's great.
And honestly, and this is what I want our viewers and listeners to see, that we may have disagreements, we may not agree on everything, but we can still come together. Yes, we can still come together. We can laugh about stuff, and this is what I love seeing, and this is what I want the company to realize, that you can disagree on things, but still come together in the end as a whole, as friends, as family. And that's what it's all about. That's where, me personally, that's what world peace is all about for me, is you can have disagreements, you can have differences of opinion, you can come from different backgrounds, different cultures, but at the end of the day, we're all human. We should all be able to come together in unity.
You're going to make me happy cry.
Well, no, I mean, that's what Disney represented.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's the unity. It's hey, it's like sports, right? We can be on different sides of the ideological spectrum, but we're rooting for the same team, kind of thing. With Disney, it was a very unifying thing, and it's like, hey, we would never maybe necessarily come together in any other aspect, but we can kind of come over in our combined love and rooting for this company to succeed. So. Yes, I that part of it, that with these policy decisions and everything else, if we can get back to that, that's what makes me most excited.
And Walt Disney and his speeches, to me, if that's happy cry and heart, and to me, if anyone finds him in this, just to me, it's a no-go. If anyone finds him problematic, they shouldn't be on the Stories Matter group. They shouldn't be at a level where they can make decisions. You find Walt Disney problematic, just leave the company. Go. You shouldn't be there at all.
150%. Because you don't know Walt if that's the case.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
So maybe you shouldn't be touching his stories as a result.
And that's even part of one of his major attractions that are still at the parks today. It's a world of laughter. It's a world of tears.
It's a world of
hopes and a world of fears. Mm-hmm. There's so much that we share. But it's time. We are aware. It's a small world after all.
That's it, man. That's it.
So I think with that being said, I think that's the perfect note to actually end this in-depth, very interesting, or as Mr. Vash Sky likes to call it, a very robust discussion.
Christine Wastelands McCarthy, man.
He must credit Christine.
Yes,
I have to.
yes,
I have to.
absolutely. But see, I have to credit Vash, and then he has to credit her because
yes,
it has to. That's how it has
down
to
the
go.
line. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I stand corrected.
But I want to thank you all for joining us. I'll start with you, Alia. Where could everyone find you on social media?
Twitter at Alia Aloha.
There you go.
And Mr. Vash Sky, Dr. Dre, Producer Dre, host of Freshly Squeezed. Let everyone know where they can find you on social media, sir.
Hey, best place to find me is going to be at Vashguy, right down there. Just how it's spelled. Type in the Twitter, should pop up for all the robust discussion, as Christine Wasteland McCarthy would say. That's it's been an interesting time on there, and everybody who reaches out, it's really, really cool. So having a lot of great discussion, and as we said before on this show, hey, leave a comment, send a message to us. A lot of times, what you have to say, your questions or anything, sometimes it makes it into whole shows. So please go ahead and do that. Like and subscribe right there, because we've got a lot of great content coming at you over the next couple of days. I can assure you of that. And if you want to see me, well, it's going to be on the channel you're watching right now at Orange Grove 55 at Freshly Squeezed, your source for juicy news and info squeezed fresh right from the Grove.
Awesome. And of course, I'm George, the Disney Family Man, the one and only. You can find me on my YouTube channel, Disney Family Man 23. You can interact with me on Twitter at Disney George. And of course, you can find me on Orange Grove 55 with Citrus Corner with some juicy, sweet, but yet sticky Disney news and info. And before we go, folks, there we go. And before we go, big shout out and lots of love to our boy, the one that actually started it all, this channel, Orange Grove 55. Lots of love to you, brother. We hope you feel better. And I also just have to say, during the time of this recording, his channel actually reached a major milestone for the 4,000 subscribers, which that's just absolutely amazing. And
absolutely fantastic. Absolutely fantastic.
So we're happy for you, brother. You deserve it. And for anyone who is not subscribed, please subscribe to his channel. He does a hell of a job to keep this channel going. We're just one small piece of this that he has created. So
like the video, subscribe.
There you go. As Walt created Disneyland for our playground, Orange Grove 55 built this channel as our social media platform. So I want to just say that thank you again, Orange Grove 55, for be a part of your channel, your platform, and all that you do. We greatly appreciate you, brother. So having said that, thank you, everyone. And as always, have a wonderful, wonderful day.